I cried at the altar when my parents didn't show. Where they were instead is unbelievable, and then I never thought I'd be the type of person to share my personal life like this, but I need to get this off my chest. For as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet, overlooked one in my family. I'm Emily. I'm 22 years old, and a few weeks ago, I married the most wonderful man, Nathan. It should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, it turned into a painful reminder of how little I seemed to matter to my parents. Growing up in Mapleton, Wisconsin, I learned pretty quickly how to be independent. My parents, Mark and Karen, always said they appreciated how self-sufficient I was. At first, I took it as a compliment. I was the kid who never asked for much, who never made a fuss. But as I got older, I realized their praise wasn't really praise at all. Being self-sufficient was just their excuse for ignoring me. My older brother Ryan was the golden child when we were kids. He was athletic, outgoing, and always brought home trophies from soccer or school competitions. I didn't mind that much. He was my big brother, and I looked up to him. But then, 5 years ago, Ryan married Ava, and everything changed. Ava came into our family like a hurricane. She was 30 now, but even at 25 when I first met her, she seemed larger than life. She was confident, charming, and loud in a way that demanded attention. People were naturally drawn to her, including my parents. They were smitten with her almost immediately. At first, I liked Ava too. She was bubbly and fun, the type of person who could walk into a room and instantly become the center of it. I admired how comfortable she was in her own skin. But then I started noticing things. Family dinners would somehow turn into conversations about her job, her friends, her new haircut, her future plans. Every holiday was the Ava show. If I shared something about my own life, like a good grade at school or a new hobby, it was treated like background noise. I remember one Thanksgiving a couple of years ago. I had just finished my junior year in college and was excited to share the news that I'd been accepted into an internship program I'd worked hard for. I told my family, expecting at least a little bit of pride or excitement. Instead, my mom smiled, nodded, and immediately turned to Ava, asking, "Did you end up picking out those invitations for your party yet?" It stung. Moments like that happen more than I care to admit, but I learned to keep my head down and push through. I thought if I just kept being the good kid, the one who didn't make waves, maybe one day they'd see me too. Then came Ava's birthdays. Every year, she throws herself a massive, over-the-top birthday party. I'm talking custom decorations, catering, themes. One year, she even hired a magician. My parents treated her birthdays like national holidays. They'd spend weeks helping her plan, picking out the perfect gifts, and hyping up the event like it was the party of the century. Meanwhile, my birthdays were lucky to get a card and a last-minute dinner at a local diner. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. It was just a birthday, right? But when you're the one being pushed aside, year after year, it starts to wear you down. When Nathan and I got engaged, I was hopeful things would be different. This was my wedding day, one of the biggest days of my life. I thought, surely, this time they'd show up for me. I even picked a date that wouldn't conflict with anything. I planned everything with my family in mind because I wanted them to be there. I wanted them to see me, to celebrate me, just this once. Nathan and I were never the type to want something extravagant. We decided on a small garden wedding just outside of Mapleton, surrounded by the people we loved most. The venue was beautiful, with an outdoor ceremony space full of lush flowers and fairy lights strung through the trees. It was everything I dreamed of, simple and meaningful. As the date got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Ava's birthday was scheduled for the week before my wedding. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, it's just a birthday party, right? It happens every year. My wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event. But the more I talked to my parents, the clearer it became where their priorities lay. Whenever I mentioned wedding plans, they seemed distracted. I'd bring up the seating chart or the florist, and my mom would cut me off to gush about Ava's birthday party plans. "Did you hear Ava rented a food truck for her party?" she said one evening over the phone, her voice dripping with excitement. "She's even having live music this year. Isn't that fun?" "That sounds nice, Mom," I replied, trying not to let my voice shake. "I finalized the catering for the wedding, by the way." "Oh, that's good, sweetie. Did I tell you Ava's looking at balloon arches for the party? I think it'll be gorgeous. It was like this every time I tried to bring up the wedding. The closer we got to the date, the less interested they seemed. Then came the conversation that broke me. A week before the wedding, my parents asked me to come by their house for what they called a quick chat. I thought maybe they wanted to go over last-minute details, maybe help out with something for the ceremony. I walked in smiling, ready to share my excitement about the big day. Instead, I sat down across from them and felt the air shift. My mom wouldn't meet my eyes, and my dad cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sweetheart," my mom started, her voice careful. "We've been meaning to talk to you about something." My heart sank. My dad jumped in, trying to sound reasonable. "We might not be able to make it to your wedding." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "What?" I asked, stunned. "What do you mean you might not make it?" My mom sighed like this was hard for her. "Ava really needs us to help with her birthday party. She's been so stressed, and we promised we'd be there to help her set up and keep things running smoothly." I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. "You're telling me you're skipping my wedding for Ava's birthday party?" "It's not like that," my dad said, shaking his head. "You've always been so independent, Emily. We figured you'd understand." "Understand?" I repeated, my voice rising. "It's my wedding. My wedding. And you're choosing her party over me?" My mom gave me this small, apologetic smile that only made me angrier. "We'll try to make it to the reception, sweetie. You know how much Ava counts on us." Their words felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I left their house in tears, barely able to see the road as I drove home. When I told Nathan what had happened, he was furious on my behalf, but all I could feel was numb. This was supposed to be my day, the one day where I got to be the priority. I'd spent years being pushed aside, and now, even on my wedding day, I wasn't enough. A part of me still hoped they'd change their minds. Maybe they'd wake up on the morning of the wedding and realize how wrong they were. But deep down, I knew better. For the first time in my life, I was starting to see my parents clearly. I spent the rest of that evening sitting on the couch with Nathan, my hands still shaking from the confrontation with my parents. I replayed their words in my head over and over again. They might not make it to my wedding. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Who skips their own daughter's wedding for a birthday party? Nathan sat quietly beside me, his arm draped over my shoulder while I stared at the floor. Finally, I broke the silence. "I don't understand," I said, my voice raw. "Why would they do this? I'm their daughter. How can they think it's okay?" Nathan sighed, clearly trying to choose his words carefully. "They've been prioritizing Ava for years, Em. I hate that it's come to this, but are you really surprised?" I blinked, my throat tightening. "I don't know. I thought this time would be different. I mean, it's my wedding, Nathan. It's not just some random day. I really thought." My voice cracked before I could finish. Nathan pulled me closer, resting his chin on top of my head. "You have every right to feel hurt, Emily. But listen to me. This is not about you. This is about them. Their inability to see what's important. You haven't done anything wrong. I just wanted them there," I whispered. "I wanted my parents to be proud of me for once." "I know," he murmured softly. The next week leading up to the wedding was one of the hardest weeks of my life. I'd go through the motions of finalizing last-minute details, trying to focus on the happiness I should have been feeling. My bridesmaids were amazing. They stayed with me, helped me decorate, and took care of little things I couldn't bear to deal with. They tried so hard to keep my spirits up. But every time I looked at the seating chart and saw the 2 empty chairs at the front reserved for mother of the bride and father of the bride, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. At first, I told myself they might change their minds. Maybe they'd come to their senses. Maybe they'd realize how ridiculous they were being and show up at the last minute. That tiny hope is what kept me going. I didn't tell anyone else about what had happened, not my friends, not Nathan's family. I couldn't bear the embarrassment of explaining that my own parents had chosen Ava's birthday party over my wedding. The day before the wedding, I finally got the confirmation I had been dreading. My phone buzzed while I was helping set up some decorations at the venue. It was a text from my mom. "We hope the setup is going well, sweetie. Let us know if you need help with anything at the reception in case we can swing by after Ava's party. Love you, Swing by? My wedding had been reduced to something they might swing by if they had time, like a coffee shop stop on the way home. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Everything okay? One of my bridesmaids, Lily, asked as she walked up with a box of centerpieces. I quickly locked my phone and shoved it into my pocket. Yeah, it's fine, I mumbled, forcing a smile. Just my mom checking in. She seemed to believe me, and I felt a pang of guilt for lying. But how could I admit the truth? That my parents didn't care enough to be here? That they were too busy doting on Ava to bother showing up for one of the most important days of my life? That night, Nathan and I held our small rehearsal dinner with close friends and his family. I had dreaded this part of the process, knowing my parents wouldn't be there. And as we sat around the dinner table, listening to Nathan's parents share sweet, heartfelt stories, I couldn't stop the tears from welling up. At one point, Nathan's mom, Mary, placed her hand gently over mine. Emily, you're going to be such a beautiful bride tomorrow. We're so happy to be here for you and Nathan. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Thank you. That means a lot. It wasn't fair. I should have been hearing those words from my mom and dad. After the dinner, Nathan walked me back to my apartment. The air was cool and still, but my thoughts were loud, swirling like a storm I couldn't calm. Nathan glanced at me as we stopped outside my door. Emily, are you okay? I shook my head. No, I'm not okay. Tomorrow is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and all I can think about is the fact that my parents won't be there. He took both of my hands in his and looked at me seriously. Listen to me. Tomorrow isn't about them. Tomorrow is about us, about starting our life together. I know this hurts, but I promise you, we're going to have a beautiful day. I nodded, but his words didn't fully sink in. How could they, when the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had made it so clear that I wasn't a priority? I barely slept that night. I kept picturing Ava's birthday party, my parents laughing, smiling, celebrating as if nothing was wrong, while I walked down the aisle to two empty chairs. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with an overwhelming sense of dread. My bridesmaids arrived early, buzzing with excitement as they helped me get ready. They tried to fill the room with laughter and lightness, but I couldn't shake the heaviness in my chest. Are you okay? Lily asked softly as she curled my hair. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red, my face pale. Yeah, I lied again. Just nervous, I guess. As we arrived at the venue, my breath caught in my throat when I saw the two empty chairs at the front. They were right there, glaring at me, as if mocking me. While my bridesmaids flitted around making sure everything was perfect, I snuck off to the dressing room. I locked the door behind me, sat down in the corner, and let myself cry. I couldn't stop the tears. This was supposed to be the best day of my life, but all I felt was heartache. I didn't know how long I sat there before there was a knock on the door. Emily? Nathan's voice was soft and concerned. I wiped my eyes quickly. Come in. Nathan stepped inside, immediately crossing the room to kneel in front of me. Hey, he said gently. What's going on? I shook my head. I don't know if I can do this, Nathan. I don't know if I can walk down that aisle and pretend everything's fine. He cupped my face in his hands, forcing me to meet his eyes. Emily, you don't have to pretend. I know this hurts. I know it's not fair. But when you walk down that aisle, I'll be waiting for you. And that's all that matters. We're starting our life together, and nothing can take that away from us. His words were enough to pull me back from the edge. I took a shaky breath and nodded. You're right. I just wish it didn't feel this way. I know, he said softly, but you're not alone in this. You have me. You have our friends. You have everyone here who loves you. I let him help me up, and as I stood in front of the mirror one last time, I tried to push all the hurt aside. I told myself that today wasn't about my parents. It wasn't about Ava's party. It was about Nathan and me, about our love, our future, and the family we were building together. And so I walked out of that room, ready to face the day, even if my heart was still breaking. The moments before I walked down the aisle felt surreal, as if I was caught between a dream and a nightmare. My bridesmaids had already gone ahead, leaving me alone at the entrance of the garden. The soft notes of the music floated in the air, blending with the quiet chatter of guests settling into their seats. I clutched my bouquet tightly, the stems pressing into my palm, as if holding on harder would somehow keep me steady. The sun was bright, filtering through the trees and casting patches of light on the ground, but all I could see were those empty chairs. 2 seats in the front row, marked with Mother of the Bride and Father of the Bride, sat untouched, like glaring reminders of everything that wasn't right. They should be here. My mom and dad should be sitting there, smiling at me, whispering to each other about how proud they are. But they aren't. I let out a shaky breath when the wedding coordinator appeared next to me, her face beaming. "It's time, Emily. You look perfect." Perfect. The word felt wrong. I didn't feel perfect. I felt hollow. I nodded, though, because there was no turning back now. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped into view. The soft hum of conversation died down, and all eyes turned to me. I tried not to look at anyone except Nathan, standing at the altar. Nathan. There he was, waiting for me with his hands clasped and a look of quiet reassurance in his eyes. His smile was steady, calm, like an anchor pulling me toward him. I focused on him and nothing else, forcing my feet to move forward one step at a time. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't block out the empty spaces in the front row. They felt louder than the music, heavier than the flowers in my hands. I blinked hard, swallowing the knot in my throat. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but I couldn't stop the ache spreading through me. As I passed my Aunt Linda, I caught a glimpse of her teary smile. Her expression was soft and filled with love, and for a brief moment, I felt the weight lift slightly. I kept going, step after step, until finally, I reached Nathan. He took my hand in his, and the warmth of his touch steadied me. His thumb brushed against my palm as if to say, "I'm here. You're not alone. You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice quiet enough for only me to hear. I smiled faintly, blinking back tears. I wanted to focus on him, on us, on this moment that we'd planned for so long. The officiant began speaking, his words a blur in my ears. I tried to concentrate, but my mind kept drifting back to my parents. Were they at Ava's party now? Were they laughing, celebrating, completely unbothered by the fact that they were supposed to be here? Did they even think about me? When it came time for our vows, Nathan spoke first. His voice was steady, full of love, and his words cut through the fog in my mind like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Emily," he said, looking directly into my eyes, "from the moment you came into my life, you've shown me what it means to love and be loved. You are my best friend, my partner, my everything. I promise to stand by your side through every joy and every challenge. You are my forever." The tears I'd been holding back threatened to spill again, but this time, they weren't from sadness. They were from the love and certainty in Nathan's voice. When it was my turn, I took a shaky breath and looked at him, willing myself to focus only on him. "Nathan," I began, my voice trembling, "you've always seen me. Even when I felt small, even when I felt invisible, you reminded me of who I am. You gave me a place to feel safe, to feel loved. I promise to love you as fiercely as you have loved me, to stand by your side, and to share my life with you completely." His hands tightened around mine, and I could see the love in his eyes. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of peace. We exchanged rings, and I watched as Nathan slid the band onto my finger. The moment felt like a promise, real, solid, unshakable. The officiant smiled and said the words I'd been waiting for. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Nathan leaned in, his hands gently cupping my face as he kissed me. The crowd erupted into applause, and I felt a small smile creep onto my lips. I had done it. We had done it. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Hugs, congratulations, flashes of the photographer's camera. I went through the motions, smiling and thanking everyone who had come. But the ache inside me never fully left. I kept looking over at those chairs, expecting my parents to walk in at the last minute. They didn't. At the reception, I tried to push everything aside. The garden was beautiful, with fairy lights hanging overhead and candles glowing softly on each table. Nathan's parents, Mary and John, were incredible, making sure the guests were comfortable and enjoying themselves. At one point, Mary approached me with a plate of cake in her hand. "You haven't eaten anything, sweetheart. You need to take care of yourself today." I took the plate and smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Mary." She gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "We're so proud of you, Emily. You're a beautiful bride, and we're so lucky to have you in the family." Her words caught me off guard. Proud of me? My heart clenched painfully as I nodded and thanked her. Later in the evening, I needed a moment to myself. I slipped away from the crowd and sat at a small table in the corner of the garden, hidden from most of the guests. My phone buzzed in my purse, and for a second, I let myself hope. Maybe my parents had texted me. Maybe they were on their way. I pulled out my phone and unlocked it. There was no message from my parents, just a new post from my mom on social media. It was a photo of her and Ava at the birthday party, standing under a massive balloon arch. My mom was grinning, holding a glass of champagne, while Ava stood beside her like a queen. The caption read, "Celebrating Ava's big day. So proud of her for pulling off such an amazing party." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. My parents had skipped my wedding to go to that. They were celebrating, smiling, laughing while I stood here on one of the most important days of my life, alone. The tears came before I could stop them. I shoved my phone back into my bag and wiped my cheeks quickly, but the ache in my chest was unbearable. "Emily?" Nathan's voice startled me. I looked up to see him walking toward me, concern etched across his face. "I'm fine," I said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. He crouched down next to me, his hand brushing my arm. "You don't have to say that. What's wrong?" I shook my head as more tears slipped down my face. "It's just my parents. I saw the pictures. They're at the party right now, having the time of their lives. They didn't even call, Nathan. They didn't even try." His expression softened, and he reached up to wipe a tear from my cheek. "Emily," he said quietly, "they don't deserve to take this day away from you. They don't deserve a single thought." I looked at him, my voice trembling. How could they do this? How could they choose her over me? "I don't know," he admitted. "But what I do know is that you're not alone. Look around you. These people are here because they love you. I love you. That's what matters." I took a shaky breath and let his words sink in. He was right, even if it didn't take away the pain. I wasn't alone. I had Nathan. I had people who showed up because they wanted to celebrate us. For the rest of the night, I tried to hold on to that thought, even as the hurt lingered like a shadow I couldn't quite escape. The day after the wedding, I woke up feeling like I was moving through fog. The whirlwind of the ceremony and reception was over, but I couldn't shake the weight pressing on my chest. Nathan made us breakfast, sliding a plate of eggs and toast in front of me with a small smile, but I barely touched it. "Emily," he said gently, "you need to eat something." I stared down at the food, picking at it with my fork. "I just don't get it, Nathan. How could they not be there? How could they do that to me and act like it's no big deal?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Because they don't want to admit they're wrong, and they don't want to take responsibility for hurting you." I looked at him, tears stinging my eyes. "But they're my parents. I've always tried to be the good one, the one who doesn't cause problems, who doesn't demand attention. Doesn't that count for something?" Nathan reached across the table and took my hand. "It should, Emily. But the way they act says more about them than it does about you." His words were comforting, but the hurt still lingered. I couldn't shake it. I kept picturing the empty chairs, my parents laughing at Ava's party, posting on social media as if it were the most important day in the world. I needed answers. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't sit with it any longer. I grabbed my keys and told Nathan, "I'm going to talk to them." He didn't try to stop me. "Do you want me to come with you?" I shook my head. "No. I need to do this on my own." The drive to my parents' house felt like it took hours, even though it was only 15 minutes away. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest as I rehearsed what I was going to say. "You missed my wedding. Do you realize what you've done?" When I pulled into the driveway, their car was there, and I could hear faint laughter coming from inside. I took a deep breath and walked up to the door, my nerves buzzing like static. I knocked twice before stepping inside, the way I always had. They were sitting in the living room, my mom curled up on the couch with her phone, and my dad scrolling through something on his tablet. My mom looked up first, her smile fading slightly when she saw me. "Emily," she said cautiously, "we weren't expecting you to stop by." I stood there, my fists clenched at my sides. "I think we need to talk." Mark glanced up from his tablet, clearly uncomfortable. "Is everything okay?" I scoffed, unable to hold it back. "No, everything is not okay. I came here to ask you how you could skip my wedding for Ava's birthday party." My mom sighed. Setting her phone down like this was just an inconvenience for her. "Sweetheart, we already told you. Ava needed us. She was stressed, and we had promised we'd be there to help." "Ava was stressed?" My voice rose, anger finally bubbling to the surface. "She throws a party every year, Mom. Every single year. And you're telling me that her birthday was more important than my wedding?" "It's not about importance," my dad said quickly, trying to sound reasonable. "We thought you'd understand. You've always been so independent, Emily. You've never needed us the way Ava does." I stared at him, stunned. "Are you listening to yourself right now? I'm independent because I had to be. Because you were too busy treating Ava like the center of the universe to notice me." My mom's expression hardened. "That's not fair, Emily. Not fair." I shot back, my voice trembling. "You're right, it's not fair. It's not fair that I had to walk down the aisle and see those empty chairs where you were supposed to be. It's not fair that I spent the most important day of my life feeling like I wasn't enough for you. And it's not fair that you don't even seem to care." For the first time, both of them were silent. My dad shifted uncomfortably, and my mom crossed her arms, as if trying to shield herself. Finally, my mom muttered, "We're sorry if you feel that way. But what's done is done. You can't keep holding on to this." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I had come here hoping for an apology, for something that showed they understood how much they had hurt me. But they didn't. They couldn't even take responsibility. I shook my head, my voice quieter now. "I'm not holding on to anything, Mom. You made your choice. You chose her over me, and you didn't even think twice about it. You missed my wedding. I don't think I'll ever get over that." My dad opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned on my heel and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel as tears rolled down my face. I had hoped, foolishly, that they'd say something, anything, that showed they cared. But all they had done was make excuses. When I finally got home, Nathan was waiting for me on the porch. He stood up as I walked toward him, his face full of concern. "How did it go?" he asked softly. I shook my head, my voice breaking as I said, "They don't get it, Nathan. They don't care." He didn't say anything. He just wrapped me in his arms, holding me tightly as I let the tears fall. For the first time, I let myself grieve, not just their absence at the wedding, but years of being pushed aside, of never being enough for them. When I pulled back, I looked at Nathan, searching for his steady reassurance. "I don't know if I can forgive them," I whispered. "You don't have to," he said firmly. "Not now. Not ever, if that's what you decide. You don't owe them anything, Emily." Hearing those words made something shift inside me. For so long, I had been holding on to this idea that I needed my parents' approval, that their love was something I had to earn. But Nathan was right. I didn't owe them anything. That night, I sat down with a blank notebook and started writing. I poured everything onto the page. The years of feeling like I didn't matter, the heartbreak of their absence, the way they refused to acknowledge how deeply they had hurt me. I didn't write it for them. I wrote it for me. By the time I set down the pen, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't magically healed. But I had taken the first step toward letting go of the hold they had on me. And for the first time, I realized that I didn't need them to see me. I had people who already did. The days following my confrontation with my parents were strange and heavy. I kept waiting for a text or a call, some kind of follow-up where they'd finally say the words I needed to hear. Maybe a real apology. Maybe even an acknowledgement that they'd hurt me. But my phone stayed silent. Nathan stayed close to me, sensing that I was struggling even when I didn't say it out loud. On the third day after the confrontation, I sat on the couch, staring out the window at nothing in particular. Nathan sat beside me, rubbing small circles on my back. Are you okay? He finally asked, his voice gentle. I shook my head. I don't know. I feel like I'm waiting for something, even though I know it's not coming. Emily, Nathan said quietly, you don't need to keep waiting for them. You don't need their validation to move forward. You have me, you have our friends, and you have so many people who showed up for you. I looked at him and managed a faint smile. I know. You're right. It's just hard. He didn't push me further. He just let me sit there, sorting through the mess in my mind. That afternoon, everything took a turn when I got a call from my Aunt Linda. She had always been outspoken, the only person in the family who wasn't afraid to call things out for what they were. Emily, she said the moment I answered, I heard about your parents skipping the wedding. Is it true? Hearing her ask the question out loud stung all over again, but I forced myself to respond. Yeah, they said Ava needed them for her birthday party. They promised her they'd be there. There was a long pause, and then Aunt Linda let out an exasperated sigh. I can't believe them. I really can't. That is absolutely shameful, Emily. I am so sorry. You deserved so much better than that. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thank you. I don't know what to do with any of this, honestly. It's just a lot. Well, she said sharply, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not letting them get away with it. They need to hear how wrong this was. Wait, Aunt Linda, what are you talking about? But before she could answer, I heard the faint chime of a notification on my phone. When I pulled it up, I saw it. A message in the family group chat. Aunt Linda, I can't believe Mark and Karen skipped Emily's wedding for Ava's birthday party. That is beyond unacceptable. This family needs to get its priorities straight. I stared at the screen, frozen. I had no idea she was going to say something so publicly, and my heart raced as I watched the chat explode with messages. Cousin Rachel, wait. What? Is this true? They didn't go to the wedding? Uncle David. What's going on here? Someone explain. Grandma, I can't believe this. Emily, I'm so sorry. If I could have traveled, I would have been there front and center for you. The messages kept pouring in, some from cousins who were shocked and others from relatives who were furious. I felt a strange mix of embarrassment and relief. I hadn't wanted to drag the family into this mess, but at the same time, seeing everyone rally around me brought a sense of validation I didn't expect. Then came a private message from my mom. Mom, Emily, I can't believe you let Linda air our private business like that. We don't deserve to be vilified over one mistake. I stared at her words, my hands trembling. One mistake. That's all they thought it was, a simple, forgettable mistake. I took a deep breath before replying. Me? I didn't ask Aunt Linda to say anything. People are upset because they see how much it hurt me. That's on you, not me. She didn't respond after that, but I could feel her anger in the silence. It didn't matter. For once, I wasn't going to let her make me feel guilty for something that wasn't my fault. What surprised me most was that later that evening, my brother Ryan finally reached out. He called, and when I saw his name pop up on my screen, I hesitated before answering. Hey, I said cautiously. Emily, Ryan began, his voice quieter than usual. I just wanted to check on you. How are you doing? I almost didn't know how to answer. I'm okay, I guess. Why are you calling, Ryan? He let out a long sigh. Because I should have said something earlier. I know what Mom and Dad did was wrong. I didn't want to get in the middle of it at first, but now, I don't know. I feel awful for not standing up for you. I gripped the phone tighter. Ryan, they chose Ava over me. And you let it happen. You didn't say anything, and that hurt too. I know, he admitted quietly. You're right. I should have spoken up. I guess I just didn't realize how bad things had gotten until I saw the photos. Ava's party was over the top, and I couldn't stop thinking about you and the wedding. I'm sorry, Em. His words caught me off guard. For years, Ryan had stood by silently, letting Ava soak up the spotlight and letting my parents cater to her every whim. Hearing him admit that he saw it, really saw it, felt like a small step toward healing. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally, but it's going to take me a while to forgive any of this. I get that, he said. I'm trying to set some boundaries with Ava too. I don't want this to happen again. When we hung up, I sat on the couch for a long time, processing everything. Ryan's words didn't fix what had happened, but they gave me hope that maybe things could change. At least someone in my family was starting to see how much damage had been done. That night, Nathan and I sat on the back porch, the air cool and quiet around us. I told him about Aunt Linda's messages, about my mom's reaction, and about Ryan's call. It's a mess, I admitted, staring up at the stars. Nathan wrapped an arm around me and pulled me closer. Maybe, but you don't have to clean it up, Emily. You've carried enough of this already. I leaned my head against his shoulder. I know. I'm just so tired of it all. Then let it go, he said softly. Focus on the people who showed up for you, the people who love you. That's what matters. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of peace settle in my chest. He was right. My parents might never understand the pain they caused, and maybe they never would take responsibility for it. But that wasn't something I could control. What I could control was how I moved forward, and I was ready to start letting go. I got banned from Christmas for standing up to my family. Indy, my stepmother, demanded an apology from me, but I insisted on my own, and then, I'm Derek, a 21-year-old college student in Minneapolis. College has been tough this semester, but I've been managing. A few nights ago, I went to dinner at my dad's house in St. Paul. It wasn't something I was particularly looking forward to, but family is family, right? Dad married my stepmom, June, about 4 years ago, and while I don't live with him anymore, I try to keep things civil. It's not like I'm there every weekend. I only visit occasionally, and I figured a casual dinner would be harmless. When I arrived, the house looked as pristine as ever. June always had a thing for order and appearances. She'd cooked dinner, and the dining room was set with the fancy plates and glasses she only brought out for special occasions. Dad was already seated, scrolling through his phone, and June greeted me with her signature tight-lipped smile. The dining table, long and polished, felt almost too formal for what was supposed to be a relaxed evening. We started dinner with the usual small talk. Dad asked about school, and I told him about my finals coming up and how I'd been struggling a bit this semester. Nothing unusual, just the typical stress of balancing classes, part-time work, and trying to have a life. It felt good to vent a little, even if Dad and June weren't the most sympathetic audience. Then, out of nowhere, Dad said something that caught me completely off guard. Well, he said, smirking, I guess we know who won't be making the dean's list in this family. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. It wasn't just the joke. It was the way he said it, so dismissive and smug. I froze for a moment, staring at my plate. I could feel my face heating up, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I didn't think that was funny, I said finally, trying to keep my voice steady. Instead of letting it go, Dad leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening. What's wrong? You used to have a sense of humor. I glanced at June, hoping she might intervene, but she just shook her head and added, Honestly, Derek, you've gotten so sensitive lately. It's like you can't take a joke anymore. I clenched my fork tighter, debating whether to respond or let it slide. My mind raced with comebacks, but I knew anything I said would only escalate things. Taking a deep breath, I decided to change the subject. I asked June about her work, trying to shift the conversation to neutral ground. It didn't work. Dad wasn't ready to drop it. You know, Derek, if you keep this up, you're going to have a hard time out in the real world. People aren't going to tiptoe around your feelings. I stared at him, my appetite gone. It's not about feelings, Dad. It's about respect. That joke wasn't funny. It was unnecessary. That was the wrong thing to say. Dad's smirk vanished, replaced by a sharp glare. Disrespectful. That's what you are. You come here, ruin the mood, and then act like I'm the problem? June chimed in again, her voice cold and clipped. You know, Derek, this is exactly why family dinners have been so strained lately. You always find a way to make everything about you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How had this spiraled so quickly? I hadn't yelled, slammed my fists, or even raised my voice. All I'd done was not laugh at a joke that wasn't funny. Feeling the tension in the room suffocating me, I made the decision to leave. Thanks for dinner, I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. I think it's best if I go. Dad didn't stop me. Instead, He muttered something under his breath about ungrateful kids, loud enough for me to hear as I walked to the door. June followed me out of the dining room, shaking her head. You know, Derek, you need to learn to lighten up. Life's too short for this kind of drama. I didn't respond. There was no point. I grabbed my jacket, said a curt goodbye, and left. The chilly November air hit me as I stepped outside, but it felt good, almost refreshing after the stifling atmosphere inside. The whole drive back to my apartment, I replayed the evening in my head, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. Was I overreacting? Should I have laughed it off like Dad wanted? But no matter how I turned it around in my mind, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. I didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't just the joke. It was the way they dismissed my feelings, like they didn't matter, like I didn't matter. When I got home, I texted my sister, Grace, to vent. She's older than me by a few years and usually more level-headed. I told her about the dinner, hoping for some kind of support. Her response? You should probably just apologize, Derek. It's not worth the drama. That stung more than I expected. I put my phone down, frustrated and exhausted. If even Grace wasn't on my side, what was the point? As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, disappointment. Part of me wanted to let it all go, to pretend it never happened. But another part of me knew that if I didn't stand up for myself now, it would only get worse. This wasn't just about a stupid joke. It was about respect, something I was starting to realize I'd been denied for a long time. I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing. Groggy and still reeling from the events of the previous night, I grabbed it to see who was calling. It was June. For a moment, I debated whether to answer. I already knew how the conversation was going to go, but part of me figured it was better to face it head-on. I let out a sigh and pressed accept. Hello? I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. June didn't waste any time. Derek, your father and I were really disappointed in you last night. You completely ruined dinner. Do you even realize how upset you made him? I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. I didn't ruin dinner, June. I just didn't find the joke funny. That's all. Well, you could have handled it differently, she snapped. Instead, you embarrassed him and created all this unnecessary tension. Honestly, you owe him an apology. An apology? I said, incredulous. For what? Not laughing at something that upset me? I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I just chose not to laugh. She sighed heavily, as if I were the unreasonable one. You're being stubborn, Derek. Family is about compromise. If you don't fix this, you're going to make things even harder for everyone. I'm not apologizing for how I felt, I said firmly. Well, if that's how you feel, then maybe it's best if you don't come around until you're ready to be part of the family again, she said coldly. Including Christmas. We can't have this kind of drama at a family gathering. That was the last straw for me. I didn't argue. I just said, thanks for letting me know, and hung up. A couple of hours later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a long text from Dad. It started with, family doesn't treat each other like this, and went downhill from there. He accused me of being disrespectful, ungrateful, and selfish. He said I'd ruined the evening, and that he expected me to apologize to both him and June for my behavior. I stared at the screen, rereading the text several times. It was unbelievable. I had come over to share a meal, kept my cool despite being provoked, and now I was the villain? I decided to respond carefully. I typed out a message explaining my side of things, that I hadn't intended to cause any tension but wasn't going to apologize for feeling hurt by something he said. I hit send, knowing full well it wasn't going to go over well. It didn't. By the afternoon, things had escalated even further. June sent me a follow-up message, even longer than Dad's. She accused me of disrespecting him, ruining the family dynamic, and acting like a child. She made it clear that until I apologized, I was banned from their house. And just to twist the knife, she mentioned Christmas specifically. You won't be welcome at the family gathering this year unless you make things right, she wrote. I couldn't believe it. Christmas had always been a time for family, even when things were tense. To be outright banned felt like a slap in the face. I called my sister Grace, hoping she'd understand. Can you believe this? I said after explaining everything. Grace sighed on the other end of the line. Derek, I get it. I really do. But maybe you should just apologize and move on. It's not worth all this drama. Not worth it. I shot back. Grace, they're the ones making this a big deal. I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I have to apologize for standing up for myself? Because it's easier, she said bluntly. You're making it harder than it needs to be. Just say sorry, even if you don't mean it. Keep the peace. Her words stung. It felt like she was siding with them, even though she knew how unfair this all was. I'm tired of always being the one who has to keep the peace, I said. Why is it my responsibility? Why can't they take responsibility for once? Grace sighed again, clearly frustrated. Look, I'm not trying to argue. I just think you're blowing this out of proportion. I ended the call shortly after that. It was clear I wasn't going to get the support I was hoping for. By the next day, the situation had spiraled further out of control. I woke up to a group text from June. She had added me, Grace, and a few of my cousins. The message was long and dramatic, essentially a public declaration of my banishment. For the sake of the family's peace, we've decided it's best to celebrate without unnecessary drama this year, she wrote. My cousins chimed in quickly. One of them agreed with June outright, saying I should have just apologized. Another cousin stayed silent, but their lack of response said enough. I didn't reply. I didn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't make things worse. Later that day, my aunt called me. She's usually pretty laid back, so I thought maybe she was reaching out to check on me. But the moment I answered, it was clear she wasn't on my side. Derek, you need to fix this, she said. This whole thing is tearing the family apart. Aunt Kathy, I didn't do anything to tear the family apart, I said, trying to stay calm. I didn't start this. It doesn't matter who started it, she snapped. Sometimes you have to be the bigger person. Apologize and move on. It's not about being right. It's about keeping the family together. The call ended in an argument. She said I was being selfish and hung up before I could even respond. That evening, I got another message from Dad. This one was short and ominous. You'll regret this, it said. I stared at the words for a long time, anger bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't just about a stupid joke anymore. It was about control, manipulation, and their refusal to see me as an adult with valid feelings. I blocked both Dad and June on social media after that. I didn't want to see any more of their passive-aggressive posts or dramatic declarations. A few days later, one of my cousins reached out privately. Hey, they said, just so you know, June's been organizing a huge family Christmas without you. She's calling it a drama-free holiday. I thanked them for the heads up, but inside, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. It wasn't about the holiday itself. It was about being so easily cast aside, as if I didn't matter. When a close friend of mine heard what was happening, they invited me to spend Christmas with them and their family. I accepted without hesitation. It felt good to know someone had my back. But even as I tried to move on, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of the fallout. As the days dragged on, I thought maybe the situation might cool off. Maybe Dad and June would realize how ridiculous they were being and back down. But instead, things went in the opposite direction. It started with social media. June was the queen of curated appearances, and her posts reflected that. A couple of days after our last conversation, I saw her latest post pop up in my feed. It was a picture of her and Dad standing by their decorated Christmas tree, smiling like nothing was wrong. The caption read, "Looking forward to a drama-free holiday with family that knows how to come together." I knew the post was aimed at me. It wasn't subtle, and she knew I'd see it. I scrolled past it, trying not to let it bother me, but it stuck in my head all day. It wasn't just the pettiness of the post. It was the way it painted me as the villain to anyone who didn't know the full story. The next day, my cousin sent me a screenshot from a family group chat I wasn't part of. June had been busy spreading her version of events. She's been saying you stormed out of dinner in a rage and screamed at your dad, my cousin told me. She's making it sound like you've got some kind of anger problem. I stared at the screenshot, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. June's messages were filled with exaggerations and outright lies. She was turning the rest of the family against me, one text at a time. Thanks for letting me know. I told my cousin. No problem, they said. Honestly, this whole thing is insane. I'm sorry you're dealing with it. It was nice to know someone in the family still had my back, but it didn't make the situation any less infuriating. As if that wasn't enough, Dad decided to send another text. This one was cryptic and short. You'll regret cutting us off, Derek. It felt more like a threat than anything else. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked both him and June on social media. I was tired of seeing their posts, their jabs, their attempts to control the narrative. But blocking them didn't stop the storm. Over the next few days, more family members started reaching out. Some were supportive, but most weren't. One of my aunts called, starting the conversation with, Derek, I heard what happened at dinner. How could you disrespect your dad like that? I didn't disrespect him, I said, trying to stay calm. All I did was say I didn't find his joke funny. Well, you know how he is, she said. He was just trying to lighten the mood. You should have let it go. I'm not apologizing for having feelings, I said firmly. That's the problem with your generation, she muttered. Always so sensitive. The call ended shortly after, leaving me feeling even more isolated. A couple of days later, I got a message from a neighbor back home. They'd overheard a loud argument between Dad and June. Apparently, Dad had started to crack under the pressure. From what I heard, he wants to make things right with you, the neighbor said. But June doesn't think you deserve an apology. It wasn't exactly comforting to hear. If anything, it just confirmed what I already suspected. That June was the driving force behind most of this mess. Not long after, I got another email from Dad. This one wasn't as cryptic as the last message. It was long and filled with emotional appeals. I miss you, Derek, he wrote. I hate how things have gotten so out of hand. Can we please move past this? I just want my family back. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. I didn't want to lose my relationship with Dad. But as I kept reading, the guilt turned to frustration. Buried in the middle of his email was a familiar line. If you just apologize, we could put all this behind us. It was the same story all over again. He wanted to smooth things over without actually taking responsibility for what happened. I replied, keeping my message short. I'm not interested in moving past this unless you're willing to take accountability for your actions. Let me know when you're ready to have a real conversation. His response came quickly. You've let outside influences poison your mind, he wrote. This isn't the Derek I raised. I hope you realize what you're doing before it's too late. I spent the next couple of days trying to focus on school and work, but the situation kept creeping into my mind. I vented to my closest friends, who were incredibly supportive. One of them even suggested writing a letter to my dad, explaining everything from my perspective. You don't have to send it, my friend said, but it might help you process everything. I took their advice and spent an entire evening drafting the letter. I poured everything into it. How I felt about the dinner, the way they dismissed my feelings, and how their actions since then had hurt me even more. When I finished, I read it over several times. It felt good to get it all out, but I couldn't bring myself to send it. I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Instead, I kept the letter as a reminder of why I was standing my ground. The breaking point came a few days later when another cousin reached out. They told me June had been talking to other relatives about banning me from family events altogether. She's even mentioned getting legal action involved, my cousin said. Like, filing something to keep you away. I don't think she's serious, but it's clear she's trying to escalate things. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Legal action? Over a disagreement at dinner? It was absurd, but it also showed just how far June was willing to go to maintain control. That same night, I got a voicemail from Dad. His voice sounded strained, almost pleading. You're pushing this family to the brink, Derek, he said. I don't know how much more we can take. I deleted the voicemail without responding. The next day, one of my friends suggested I spend Christmas with them and their family. You don't need this kind of stress, they said. They were right. I accepted the invitation, deciding I wasn't going to let Dad and June ruin the holiday for me. But even as I tried to move forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. June wasn't the kind of person to let things go, and I had a sinking feeling she was just getting started. I was trying to move on and enjoy the holiday season, but June and Dad were determined to keep the drama alive. Christmas was still weeks away, yet every day brought a new layer of chaos. The first major hit came in the form of a family meeting. My cousin gave me a heads up that June had organized it specifically to discuss how to deal with Derek. "You're not invited, obviously," my cousin said over the phone. "But from what I've heard, it's going to be about making your ban from Christmas official." I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. The idea of being discussed like a problem to be solved, without even being present to defend myself, was infuriating. Later that week, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from June. It wasn't the usual passive-aggressive note. No, this one looked formal, like something you'd get from an HR department. She accused me of emotionally abusing Dad and listed every interaction we'd had over the past year. Each instance was twisted to make me look like I'd been intentionally cruel. It was so bizarre I had to read it twice to make sure I wasn't missing something. The email ended with a threat. "If this behavior continues, we'll be forced to take further action to protect ourselves." I didn't respond. At this point, engaging with her was like adding gasoline to a fire. A few days later, Grace called me out of the blue. Her tone was cautious, like she didn't want to set me off. "I think you should know," she said. "June's been talking about getting legal action involved. She wants to file something to ban you from family events permanently." I let out a bitter laugh. Legal action? For what? Not laughing at Dad's joke? "I know it's ridiculous," Grace said, "but you know how she is. She's trying to escalate this into something bigger." Grace's attempt to sound sympathetic fell flat. "And what about you, Grace?" I asked. "Are you still on their side?" There was a long pause. "I'm not on anyone's side," she said finally. "I just want the family to stop falling apart." "That's not good enough," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You've been watching this happen, and you've done nothing but tell me to apologize. How is that helping?" Grace sighed, clearly frustrated. "Derek, it's not that simple. I'm stuck in the middle here. You don't understand how much pressure they're putting on me. Then maybe you should try standing up to them for once." I shot back. The call ended shortly after. Around this time, I received a package at my apartment. The return address was my dad's house. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what I'd find inside. When I finally tore it open, my stomach sank. Inside were a bunch of my childhood belongings, old trophies, photos, and random knickknacks I hadn't seen in years. On top of everything was a folded piece of paper with a handwritten note from Dad. "You clearly don't value family," the note read. "So here's your stuff. We don't need it cluttering our home." I stared at the note, my emotions swinging between anger and heartbreak. This wasn't just about clearing space. It was a deliberate message. I shoved the box into my closet, not wanting to look at it any longer. Ignoring it felt like the best way to preserve whatever sliver of sanity I had left. The breaking point came a few days later. One of my cousins forwarded me screenshots of group chats where June had been spreading more lies. This time, she was accusing me of being unstable and claiming I'd always been a troublemaker, even as a kid. "She's really going all out," my cousin said. "That's putting it mildly," I replied. But the final blow wasn't a group chat or an email. It was an actual letter from a lawyer. When I saw the envelope with official letterhead, my heart sank. I opened it cautiously, half expecting to see some kind of restraining order. Instead, it was a defamation claim. The letter accused me of spreading lies about June and Dad, damaging their reputations, and causing emotional distress. I was floored. I hadn't said a word to anyone outside my immediate circle of friends, but it was clear they were trying to intimidate me into silence. I took the letter to a legal advisor, who looked it over and told me it was baseless. "This is just a scare tactic," they said. "They have no real case." Still, it was a new low, even for June. A couple of days later, one of my friends did something unexpected. Without telling me, they wrote a post online detailing my situation. They didn't use names or identifying details, but framed it as a story about family drama and manipulation. The post went viral. Thousands of people shared it, and the comments were overwhelmingly supportive. When my friend told me about it, I wasn't sure how to feel. On one hand, it was validating to see so many strangers take my side. On the other hand, I knew it would only add fuel to the fire if my family found out. And of course they did. Grace messaged me a day later, furious. How could you post about this online? She demanded. You're making the whole family look bad. I didn't write it, I said. A friend did, and they didn't use anyone's names. That doesn't matter, Grace snapped. Everyone knows it's about us. You're airing dirty laundry in public and making everything worse. I didn't bother arguing. No matter what I said, Grace would find a way to blame me. The next email I got from Dad was more of the same. Guilt-tripping, dramatic, and filled with phrases like, "You're tearing this family apart," and "We can't move forward until you take responsibility." But by this point, I'd had enough. I drafted a simple cease and desist letter regarding the baseless legal threats and had it sent to them. It wasn't anything fancy, but it made it clear I wasn't going to tolerate their intimidation tactics anymore. A few days later, June sent me a scathing reply. She accused me of ruining Dad's health and causing stress that was breaking him down. It was classic deflection, blaming me for the consequences of her own actions. After that, I started hearing from extended family members I hadn't spoken to in months. Some were supportive, saying they believed me and thought June had gone too far. Others were clearly fishing for gossip, more interested in the drama than the truth. For now, I decided to fully cut off contact with Dad and June. I blocked them on every platform and told mutual relatives I didn't want updates about them. It felt drastic, but at this point, I didn't see another option. Something had to change, and it clearly wasn't going to be them. For a while, things seemed quiet. Blocking Dad and June on social media gave me some peace, and I focused on finishing up my semester. But the silence didn't last. It started with an unexpected call from an old family friend, Linda. I hadn't spoken to her in years, so hearing her voice was both surprising and unsettling. "Derek," she began, "I don't know if you've heard, but your dad and June have been saying some pretty awful things about you. I thought you should know." "What kind of things?" I asked, bracing myself. "They're telling people you're manipulative, ungrateful, and tearing the family apart," she said bluntly. "But I've known you since you were a kid, and I'm not buying it. I've seen June pull stunts like this before." Hearing that someone else had noticed June's behavior was both validating and exhausting. It felt like proof that I wasn't imagining things. But it also reminded me how far she was willing to go to destroy my reputation. Not long after, I reconnected with a distant relative on Dad's side. His name was Eric, and while we'd never been particularly close, he reached out after hearing about the drama. "Honestly, I've always thought June was a little controlling," Eric said during our call. "She's been isolating your dad from this side of the family for years." "That doesn't surprise me," I said. "She's good at playing the victim, though." Eric offered to help me gather information if I needed it, which turned out to be more useful than I expected. A few days later, Eric forwarded me a batch of screenshots from a group chat. They were more messages from June, filled with lies about me being a troublemaker. She'd even gone as far as fabricating stories about me having outbursts during family events. "She's relentless," Eric said. "Tell me about it," I muttered. Amid all this, Dad sent another email. This one seemed like an attempt at reconciliation, or at least his version of it. "I regret how things have escalated," he wrote. "I just want to move forward and put this behind us." For a brief moment, I considered responding, but as I read further, I realized it was the same empty apology as before. He still refused to acknowledge the dinner incident or take responsibility for his part in the drama. I didn't reply. Then, the real kicker came. Eric called me late one evening, his voice low and cautious. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I overheard June pressuring your dad to remove you from his will." My heart sank, though I wasn't entirely surprised. It fit perfectly with her pattern of control. "She's convinced him you don't care about the family anymore," Eric continued. "I thought you should know." "Thanks for telling me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. After the call, I sat alone in my apartment, trying to process what I just heard. It wasn't about the money. I didn't care about that. It was the principle of it, the idea that she was actively working to erase me from my own family. Meanwhile, Grace reached out again. This time, she seemed conflicted, almost apologetic. "Look, I know I haven't been supportive," she said, "but I need you to understand. They've been putting a lot of pressure on me to side with them. It's not as easy as you think. Grace, they're manipulating you. Just like they're manipulating everyone else, I said. I know, she admitted. But it's hard to go against them. They've made it clear that if I don't stay in line, I'll be next on their list. Her words made me angry, but I also felt a flicker of sympathy. I could see how Dad and June's tactics had worn her down. Just think about what you're supporting, I said before ending the call. You don't have to fight them, but you don't have to help them either. Over the next few weeks, cracks began to show in June's influence. Some of the extended family started reaching out to me, offering their support. I'm sorry I believed the things she said about you, one cousin admitted. I can see now how toxic she is. It was a small victory, but it felt like a turning point. Even Dad seemed to be wavering. According to Eric, he and June had been fighting more often. She's blaming him for losing control of the family, Eric said. Eventually, I got another email from Dad. This time, it was different. He admitted he'd let June manipulate him for years, and that he regretted how things had played out. He asked if we could meet in person to talk. We met at a small coffee shop on a snowy afternoon. Dad looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. As soon as we sat down, he started apologizing. I messed up, Derek, he said, his voice shaking. I let her turn me against you, and I'm so sorry. I see now how much damage that's caused. I listened, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him, but another part was still wary. You need to understand, Dad, I said finally. This can't just be words. Things have to change if we're going to move forward. He nodded. I know. I've already started seeing a therapist to work through everything. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it felt like a start. Not long after, I heard through Eric that Dad had officially announced his separation from June. Apparently, their fights had reached a breaking point, and he couldn't take it anymore. She moved out of town, Eric said. Sounds like she's cutting ties with most of the family. It was strange to think about June being out of the picture. For so long, she'd been at the center of the drama, and now she was just gone. Grace also reached out again, this time with a genuine apology. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner, she said. I see now how unfair it was to expect you to apologize. We started rebuilding our relationship, slowly but surely. This Christmas, I spent the holiday with friends and a few supportive relatives. It was peaceful, drama-free, and exactly what I needed after everything that had happened. Dad sent me a letter just before the holiday, thanking me for giving him the chance to make things right. He promised to keep working on himself and to rebuild our relationship on a healthier foundation. Looking back, it's been a long, exhausting journey. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's the importance of standing firm in your boundaries. Sometimes, the only way to move forward is to let go of what's holding you back, even if that means losing people you thought would always be in your life. For now, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. Dad seems to be making genuine efforts to change, and Grace and I are on better terms. As for June, I'm just relieved her influence over the family is finally gone. Here's to hoping the new year is a little less eventful.